Welcome, everybody. It is good to be back. We had our kickoff last week, which was awesome, if I do say so myself. Sorry if you guys didn't win. Congratulations to the winners. You're all winners in my book. Oh, yeah. I had to say that. It was written here. Anyway, we're going to be jumping into a new series for the fall that I am pretty excited about called The Search for Happiness. Most everyone I know wants to be happy. There's very few people I've ever met that were like, no, I don't want to be happy. Happiness is dumb. And genuinely, I think people who've actually said stuff like that, they actually do want to be happy. They're just afraid to admit it. And I know that we find our happiness in a lot of different places in life. Something that makes you happy might not make somebody else happy, right? You might love tacos, they might not love tacos. Speaking of, if you have friends in your life who don't like tacos, just get rid of them. You don't need that kind of negativity in your life. Right? Sometimes we find happiness in who we hang out with. We find happiness in who we're dating. Maybe you find happiness in the fact that you get really good grades or are really smart or really good at a sport or a skill. There's hundreds and hundreds of different things in this world that we can find happiness in. There it is. The problem, though, is that many times, right, the things that make us happy only make us happy for a time, and then they tend to let us down. Except for tacos. Tacos never, actually that's not true. I've had disappointing tacos. Yeah, even tacos let you down. So what do? We have to find something else that makes us happy. And thus the cycle continues. So we find ourselves chasing happiness, searching for it, if you will, and feeling like ultimately it lies just outside of our grasp. And so we find ourselves thinking and saying, you know, if I just had or if I just could, right? We just fill in that blank. We look and say, oh, if I could just have blank, then I'd be happy. If I could just have better grades, if I could just have that newest phone, if I could just have more money, if I could just get them to go out with me, right? If I could just, then it would be enough. If I could just fit in, if I were popular, right? If I could just belong, then I'd be happy. I think one of the most terrifying things in all of young adulthood, teenagedom, I just made that word up, is the lunch table. Anyone with me? You don't actually have to raise your hand. I know. I've been there. I've experienced that, right? I'm willing to bet that's true for most everyone, especially if you're a public school kid, right? But figuring out where you're going to sit at lunch, or maybe you're going to like a party where you don't know a whole bunch of people, and it's like, oh, who am I going to hang out with while I'm here? Figuring out where you fit in. What do I do if my friends are eating lunch at a different period than I am? For generations, the lunch table has inspired fear and dread among many in the American society. For middle school and high school students across the world, it's a moment of intense panic right after you get that slice of pizza and then have to figure out, now what? What do I do? Where do I go? Right? Suddenly we're left with a very, very difficult decision. In elementary school, they made it easy. They just stuck you there. They took you all down as a class. You knew exactly what was going to happen. Then you move to the jungle that is middle school and high school, and the training wheels came off and real life starts. Suddenly you have to figure it out. Where do I sit? Where do I belong? Right? Anyone who's ever moved schools knows this fear all too well, especially if you move in the middle of the year, because like everyone has their routine and now you have to find like a spot somewhere that's open and hope that it's with people that you actually want to eat lunch with. When I was in high school, they had a pretty cool setup in our lunchroom. It was kind of nice. It helped the lunch period be a little less terrifying because they had these big, long tables and a bunch of loose chairs. And so, like, if there wasn't room at the table, you just go steal a chair from another table and just keep squeezing it. So there was always room for more friends. There was always room for more people. It was like a utopia. Nothing to worry about. So it wasn't difficult to squeeze in new people and make people fit. It was easy to know where you belonged. Life was good. That until the school faculty one day decided that they just wanted to give everyone stress-induced panic attacks for the entire year. So they figured our lives weren't stressful enough as teenagers in high school, figuring out what we were going to do and who we were going to be and grades and parents and girls and all that nonsense, right? So they took away the safety net that was the large lunchroom table. They got rid of them. Big lunchroom tables, gone, right? They wanted to make sure that not only did we have all the other stress, but that we had the added stress of figuring out where the heck we were going to sit, finding a place at lunch. It was the original Hunger Games, and the odds were not ever in your favor. Yeah, one of you got it. That's all right. So they got rid of the big tables, and then they got rid of all the chairs. And they put in these awkward, oval, oblong-shaped things with attached benches. 4 specifically, meaning you could sit 8 people only. And because of the awkward shape of the table, you couldn't stick them together. Oh boy, if you're the 9th friend in a group of 9, suddenly you have nowhere to sit at lunch. You could only fit 8 people around the table. I'll be honest with you, I sat with mostly seniors, which wasn't a problem until my senior year rolled around. Suddenly it was a problem. Because I went to lunch and they were all gone. They left me to fend for myself, to find somewhere to fit in. Oh, it was terrifying. Because no one likes being excluded. Nobody wants to be the one that's left out. And I'm just going to be entirely upfront with you. Those of you who are planning to go to college, it happens there too. Yep, it doesn't stop. Just because you become an adult, these moments of terror and panic don't just magically go away. I see the adults in the room yeah. I went to Geneva College. I didn't really know anybody there. I didn't have high school friends that I went to school with, where we all went to the same college. And so I walked in the dining hall for the first time, and it was genuinely terrifying. Because where you sit defines a lot about what's going to happen over the next 4 years of your life. What if you go down and sit with people and they aren't cool? Guess what? Neither are you now. What if you go down and sit with people who are cool and you're not cool enough to sit with them? That's a real problem. Maybe not for me, but okay, maybe for me, right? So here I am, 18-year-old Dave, still trying to figure out where I belong in the world. It's hard to just sit down with a group of strangers and be like, I belong here now. That takes a lot of confidence, right? What if they're weird? You don't know. Well, you can kind of figure that out. Just scope the lunch tray. If you've got, the kid that just has a giant tray of spinach and bananas, sorry if you're a spinach and banana kid, right? But that's it. What if I sit with the wrong crowd? What if I get lumped in with the wrong people? Then I'm stuck. These are the thoughts going through my head as an adult. I was 18. I could buy lottery tickets. I could vote. I could decide the next leader of the free world, but I couldn't pick a place to sit at lunch. Very real problems. Sorry. A little PTSD there. Where was I? Yeah, anyway. Having somewhere to belong. Having somewhere to feel safe. There's happiness in knowing where you fit in the world. There's a sense of happiness in having a tribe, a group, a people that you belong to. And so one of the ways we search for happiness in life is we search for happiness in belonging. That's the first point on your map. We search for happiness in belonging. Right? I solved my problem at college with who do I sit with by sitting with the people that I was in the same major with typically, because we were in the same classes. So that's who I'd identify with. That's where I belonged. And it was nice to have that. We as humans, we crave a sense of belonging. We crave community. We crave relationship. We crave a place to fit in, a place to feel safe knowing that this is where we belong. We want to have people in our lives who know about us, who care about us, and that we care about, a tribe, a group, a niche. We want people to like us. Even that one kid at your school that seems to not care if anybody likes them and actively tries to make people not like them. Guess what? Deep down, they want somebody to like them. They want to belong. And so we all look for places to fit in. Sometimes it's through shared hobbies, right? You join a club or a shared interests, right? There's clubs that you can belong to in schools, Spanish club, ski club. Some of you take after school club activities. You do karate or something like that. You belong to the Y. Maybe you're on a swim team. Maybe you're into the online gaming things. You do online gaming communities. Maybe it's just shared skills. Some of you are in band or chorus, right? You sing together. I think about our worship team up here, the tech team back there. Those are places to belong. Maybe you're a majorette or color guard. You have good hand-eye coordination. Good for you. Or ROTC, right? Maybe you take advanced classes. Maybe you're the super smart kid. You have the above 4.0 grade point average. First off, I'm not great at math, so I don't know exactly how you get more than 100%. But you can, I guess. So, yeah, good for you, right? Or track or football or volleyball or any of another 100 different things that you can belong to. We want to belong somewhere. That's universally true. We want to know where we fit in this life, in this world. From the youngest person in here to the oldest adult, that is 100% true. And if you don't believe me, ask your leaders when they're in group time with you. They want to belong too. That's part of why they're here. Right? We all search for happiness in belonging. There's comfort in that. There's joy in that. And sometimes in order to belong, we'll make sacrifices. We'll give up things in order to belong. And sometimes that's okay. Right? Sometimes you have to make a sacrifice to belong. I think about our worship team here. In order to belong on the worship team, you got to come to practice, which means you have to sacrifice your time. You have to get here. Parents have to make sacrifices. They have to drive them here and then hang around. You practice, you take lessons, right? If you're doing band or chorus or something at school, you have time that you put into that. There's effort that you put into that. So you sacrifice the other things you could be doing to do that. Or to be on a sports team. Same idea. You have to make time to be at the practices, to actually get ready for your meets and matches and games and things like that. In order to be a club, right? You have to give up something in order to be in that. Sometimes it's just money. I got to pay money in order to be a part of this thing. That's the YMCA. I got to pay money, then I can be here. I got to pay money, then I can take this lesson. I got to pay money, then I can go on this ski trip with the ski club. Right? I got to pay money, then I get to go with the Spanish club to this thing. Right? None of those are bad things. It's okay. You're sacrificing time to be here, and you belong here. This is a place to belong. I just don't charge you. It's completely free, even the food. Right? So if you're here, you belong. Welcome. We're glad you're here. But in order to be here, you have to give up on being somewhere else. That's the sacrifice. That's the trade-off. Right? Not a bad thing. But sometimes, in order to belong, we go beyond that. We go beyond what's okay to sacrifice. And we sacrifice things that go against our morals, go against what we know is right, go against who we are and who God made us to be. Right? We make sacrifices that cause us to compromise our integrity, our character. This is usually called peer pressure. And here's the thing, it works. Peer pressure wouldn't be such a cliche. You guys know what a cliche is? Yeah? Everyone knows this thing. Oh yeah, it's a big, yeah. Right? Peer pressure wouldn't be such a cliche in our society if it didn't work. I know it works. I just got you to run around a room for free Wendy's. Welcome to peer pressure. Some of you are like, yeah, he did. Why did I do that? Because the guy with the microphone told you to. It works, right? As a young man, some of the dumbest things I ever did were because of peer pressure. Were because someone in my friend group said, hey, Dave, do this thing. And I was like, okay. And somewhere inside the transactional thought process went something like this. If I do this, they'll think I'm cool and they'll like me more. And if I don't do this, they'll think I'm not cool and they'll like me less. Now, I didn't actively think that. I didn't stop and say well, let's see, if I do this thing, then Billy's going to think that I'm really cool and he's going to, no, it happens in an instant, but that's the feeling. That's how quick your brain works. That's the transaction that you make. And so you sacrifice and do the stupid thing. All right, so on some level, I knew that I was giving in to peer pressure. I knew that I was sacrificing, and usually it was definitely doing something I shouldn't have been doing in order to fit in order to feel like I belong. We want that feeling, that place, that belonging, and so we'll sacrifice, we'll compromise. Maybe that's how you ended up getting drunk at a friend's house when you thought you never would. Maybe that's how you ended up getting high, trying drugs, smoking pot, when you thought that's something I would never do, right? Maybe that's how you ended up getting physically involved in a relationship, going farther than you would. Maybe you didn't have sex, but maybe you did. Maybe it's farther than you intended and you didn't plan on it. Maybe you still are feeling shame, feeling pain, feeling difficulty for those things. Maybe that's why you act different around your friends than you do around here. Maybe that's why when you're with your friends, you're really good at those 4-letter words. And no, I'm not talking about like love. I'm talking about the ones that if you said it in class, the principal would have a talk with you, right? Maybe your language looks a little bit different, and then you work really hard not to talk like that when you're in front of mom and dad. Some of you are like, how does he know that? Because I did that. Here's what happens. One of these days, it's going to come flying out, and you're going to get grounded for 6 months like I did. It ain't worth it. Choose better words. Maybe that's why you're mean to people around you. Maybe that's why you're the mean kid in school. Maybe that's why you're the bully. Maybe that's why you talk about people behind their back. Right? Maybe that's why you're the one that tells everyone to exclude somebody. Right? That's one way to ensure that you're the one who belongs, is you're the one who keeps people out. That's why where you're at in life can be so difficult. 13 to 18, right? It can be so hard sometimes to feel like you belong, to feel like you have a place, to feel like people know who you are, to feel safe. Right? Because many times the friends we trust can stab us in the back. Many times the people we rely on and feel we can fit in with, they'll throw us right under the bus if it means it's better for them. And so it can be difficult when we're surrounded with a peer group that doesn't necessarily have our best interest in mind. Surrounded by young adults who all just want to belong as well, who all just want a place, who are all equally willing to sacrifice and compromise their character, their integrity, their morals. We all struggle at times to feel like we fit in. We'll all do things that we wouldn't normally be okay doing in order to have that feeling of safety and belonging. And here's where it comes from. Ultimately, it comes from making other people the source of our happiness when it comes to belonging, to fitting in, to feeling like we have a place. We look to other people as our primary means of happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction when it comes to belonging. But when we do that, we're in a dangerous place. It's a place that leads us to compromise, because what we've done is we've just elevated everyone who's equal with us above us. We've somehow made people our God. And so what do? We sacrifice in order to make our God happy. That's why peer pressure works. Because when we care more about what other people think of us than what God thinks of us, we've made other people our God. When we determine who we are based on what other people think of us, we've made other people our God, instead of looking and seeing who God has created us to be. See, God has designed us and made us and called us his own. We belong to him. And so when we try to find our happiness outside of that, we ultimately come up short. And so the problem is this. The problem is not that we find happiness in belonging. The problem is that we look first to other people for that rather than looking to God. That's the next point on your map. So the problem is not that you're finding happiness in belonging. There is happiness, there is joy, there is safety, there is comfort, there is goodness in belonging. Is there nobody at the computer? Something was hitting too close to home. All right, so there you go. Where was I? Oh yeah, right? So the problem is not that we find happiness in belonging. The problem is not that we find happiness in being connected, in having relationship, in feeling that safety, that comfort, that joy. The problem is that when we look solely to other people to fulfill that for us, it's never going to be fulfilled. We're always going to be chasing it. We're always going to be pursuing it. It's never going to be enough. Rather than looking where we're supposed to, which is to God, right? To God who calls us his own. So look with me at Luke 14. Luke 14, as we unpack this idea a little bit before community groups. Luke 14. It'll be on the screen behind me, but I do encourage you to open up your Bibles. It's in the New Testament. If you don't have a Bible, I would gladly give you one or show you how to download one on your phone. Luke 14, starting in verse 7. Luke 14:7 says, "Now he told a parable to those who were invited. when you notice how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, so a little context here, the he is Jesus. Jesus has been invited to what? To a party, to like a big dinner party, like a big gathering at the house of a Pharisee. It tells us this back in verse 1. So the Pharisees were the religious leaders of the day in Israel. They were big, important people. They were the handshakers and the baby kissers. It was like the politicians of the day. Not to throw all the politicians under the bus, but chasing happiness and the approval of other people. There it is. So the Pharisees were the group that liked to be honored, that liked to be important, that liked to be popular, that liked to be seen as the guys, right? They were excited. It's the like, hey, you recognize that guy, right? They were the religious leaders. They were the elite class. They were respected by all the people. They held control of the temple of worship. They could keep you out. They had the power. They were the mean girls, if you will. You'll see. You'll see it, and you'll never be able to unsee it now, right? They liked people thinking well of them, but they didn't necessarily want to think well of others. They wanted to be important and noticed, but they didn't want other people to have that. So they were a little catty towards each other too. And Jesus sees this happening, right? One of them invites Jesus to his house for dinner, but because he wants to show off a little bit to all of his Pharisee friends, right? He invites Jesus, but then he invites all of them. Why? Because he can say, look who's eating at my table. Jesus, right? But he doesn't really care if they know Jesus. He just wants to, Jesus is like showing them off. So lots of folks are around the table, and Jesus is noticing something. They're choosing for themselves the places of honor to sit. What does that mean? Right? Because we don't really have that in our culture. If you go to somebody's house for dinner, there's not like a seat of honor, right? If you went over and asked like, hey, where's your seat of honor? They might think that's some weird way of asking like where the bathroom is. Be like, down the hall and on the left, You might like, maybe this is like dad's recliner, right? Like nobody sits in dad's recliner but dad, right? So we don't really have this idea, but what it means is they were choosing seats at the table that told everyone around them, I'm the important one. So probably the best, for instance, anybody been to a wedding? Anyone been to a wedding reception? You know how like the bride and groom have like a table that's theirs? This would be like if you showed up and you sat down next to them, like pulled up your seat, like, sup, y'all. That takes some guts, right? Because if you're at that table, it's because you think you belong there. This is where I'm supposed to be. I'm important. This is my seat. Who's she? Get her out of here. That's kind of what they're doing. They're picking the best seat. They want everyone in the room to know, this is my spot. This is where I belong. If you're here and you think this is your spot, think again. Get further down, back over into that corner table, right? You ain't getting served to, like, we're eating cake and they haven't even brought your food yet. Here you go. It's the I don't know if you know this, but I'm kind of a big deal for that day. That's what that is. There you go. Cool. Anyway, verse 8. So Jesus wants to share a little story with them. It says, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, don't sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. So back to the wedding feast, you plop down next to the bride and groom all, sup, big deal, this is where I belong. And then father of the bride comes up and goes, yeah, actually, that's not your seat. And then he moves you on down back to the lower table and sticks somebody up. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. And Jesus says, so don't do that. It says, but when you're invited, go and sit in the lowest place. So when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So Jesus is like, don't take the most important seat. Take the worst seat. The one that faces the bathroom door and you kept getting hit into, right? Don't make a big deal of yourself. Rather be humble. Take a low seat. He's saying this because he sees a whole bunch of people very concerned with how they look to other people, with being recognized as important. People concerned with being liked, with being popular, with how others think of them. And he says, rather than make a big deal of yourself, sit in the lowest spot. Why would he encourage them to humble themselves? Is he trying to put them down? Is Jesus in this moment trying to knock them down a peg or two? Is he trying to take a shot at them? Maybe. But everything I know about Jesus says he isn't doing this to try and take a shot at them. Everything I know about Jesus tells me he loves these people, that he genuinely cares about them, that he wants them to know God. That's why he came. Ultimately, they're going to reject him, but he's still trying to bring them. He's the one who cries out from the cross, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And so I think Jesus sees in their actions at this banquet, at this feast, one of the things that is separating them from God. They're not actually concerned about God. They're the religious leaders. They're supposed to lead the people to God, but they're more concerned with how they look to other people. They've replaced God with other people and their own image of popularity. They've replaced God with being popular and finding their happiness in that. They care more about being liked and respected and important and popular than about actually following God. Because if they did, then they'd recognize who Jesus is. And I think Jesus wants them to be freed from that. He wants them to be freed to actually follow God, to let all that falseness go, to stop chasing something that'll never satisfy, and to truly follow God. And so his remedy? Stop worrying about those things. So who cares? Who cares if you have the worst seat in the house? Who cares if everyone in the room thinks you're the lowest piece of scum wondering how you got an invitation? Who cares? Who cares if you're not at the popular table? Who cares if you're not on the team? Who cares if you're not in the club? Who cares? At the end of the day, who cares? God knows who you are. That's enough. God knows who you are. Let him honor you. So let's keep reading. So it gets even more interesting. Because Jesus is like that. He kind of starts something and then keeps going. And so he also said to the man who invited him, so this is the guy who invited Jesus to the party, who's like, Jesus, check out my house. Look at all my cool friends. And, Jesus is like, thanks, man. This is such a great party. I love it. You should do this. We should definitely get together and do this again sometime. Not quite. So Jesus said to the man who invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, so he's giving him lessons on how to do this. You got to love Jesus confident. When you're God, you can do that. But you got to love the man's confidence in this moment. I'm at your dinner table, but I'm going to tell you how to do this. When you give a dinner or a banquet, don't invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, which probably who's all around there, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. That's odd. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Lame here meaning can't walk, not oh, he's so lame. I just like to distinguish. It's not a common vernacular these days. You guys don't even know what vernacular means. He says, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. This had to be weird as the host to hear. Dude, I threw this nice party. What are you doing? Why is he doing this, right? Now he's telling these little people to think outside of their little clique, their little group. Invite the outsider. Bring in the poor, the hurting. Bring in the weird kid that sits alone at lunch. I'm paraphrasing. Bring in that kid that nobody else wants to talk to. Include that guy that everyone avoids in the hallways. You pretend that you don't notice him. Bring in that kid that everyone talks behind their back. Quit trying to impress one another. Don't waste your time trying to get all these people to think that you're impressive. Why? Why does Jesus say this? Because life is short. Soon this life will be over and the next one will begin. Right? That's what he's saying. You'll be repaid at the resurrection. Don't think reincarnation, think eternal life. Right? Jesus is saying this world's passing away. Think about the next world. Use what resources and time and energy you have in this world towards the next one. Right? Because using it towards this one is just a waste. It doesn't get you anywhere. Jesus is saying, think about heaven, think about the future, either eternal life with him or separated from him. Jesus points us forward to the resurrection, says life is short. Use the things you have here to bless others, to bless those who can't repay you. Use what you have to the benefit of others more than the benefit of yourself. Why? Because it's what God's done for us. That's how Jesus finishes up this story in verse 15. He keeps going. When one of those reclined at table with him heard these things, he said to him, "Blessed is everyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." This guy's starting to get it. But Jesus said to him, he's close, just not there yet. "A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to those who had been invited. 'Come, for everything is now ready.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I've bought a field, I must go out and see it. Please have me excused.' And another said, 'I've bought 5 yoke of oxen, I go to examine them, please have me excused.' And another said, 'I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come.' So the servant came and reported these things to his master. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, 'Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame.' And the servant said, 'Sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room.' And the master said to the servant, 'Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who are invited shall taste my banquet.'" Jesus isn't talking about a literal party here. I mean, a little bit, but it's a parable. It's meant to teach. And here's the thing, it's about you and me. I don't know if you know that, but that story's about us. We're the outsiders. We're the outsiders. We're the poor. We're the crippled. We're the lame. In both senses of the word. Sorry. It's true for some of us, right? We're the ones in the streets. We're the blind ones. We're the hurting. We're the ones who weren't originally invited. See, God chose the Jewish people. He called Abraham to himself. He created this nation for himself. He sent his son to them. The Pharisees are the leaders of these people, and they don't have time for him. Do you see in the parable the things that they're being distracted by? Oh, I have some property I got to go take care of. Oh, I want to follow Jesus, but I need to make sure that I have a good job and a house that I can provide for myself first. Oh, I got to go take care of some oxen. Oh, I would follow Jesus, but I want to make sure I get this first and that first and this. Oh, I would follow Jesus, but I need to find a wife or a husband. I got to find a guy or a girl. Do you see the things that aren't bad, but that very quickly become God for us and distract us? And what happens? They miss out. They're too worried about what everyone else thinks, too absorbed with this world, and they miss what God is calling them to. And he tells them a parable about them doing just that. They're too busy about the cares of this world to see that Jesus is offering them eternal life. And so what does Jesus do? He offers it to us instead. People who were outsiders, who were broken, who weren't chosen to get in originally. Now we get a seat at the table. Think about that. You weren't even invited to the party. I'm not Jewish, you're not Jewish, at least probably most of you. Some of you maybe, but I wasn't invited. But now I get a seat at the table. Why? Because I'm so awesome? No. Because God is good. God made a way for me to belong. That's the point. That is why we find our happiness in Him first. That is why we can find happiness in belonging to Jesus and knowing that nothing in this world can change that. That's the last point on your map. We can find happiness in belonging to Jesus and knowing that nothing in this world can change that, right? Normally, we have to sacrifice in order to belong. Jesus sacrificed himself so that we could belong. That's the beautiful picture. That's why it matters so much more to belong to God, and then the other stuff, don't worry about that stuff. Don't worry about that stuff. Don't make your life about that stuff. If you've decided to follow Jesus, if you've trusted in him for salvation, nothing in this world can change that. Have confidence in that you belong to God, that you are his, that God loves you unconditionally. Now the big question for us to wrap up. This is such great news. God has sacrificed to make us his own so we could belong to him. If you know that's true, if you've accepted that, if you're following Jesus, do you actually live like that? If you know this is true, do you live this out in your day-to-day life? Do you live your life knowing that you belong to Jesus? Do you wake up and say to yourself, I know that I belong to Jesus, that I am his? Or does that thought get crowded out in your day-to-day? Between math class and English class and this practice and that homework and this club and that friend and this thing, does that thought get pushed to the side? And then once a week you get reminded of it, but tomorrow morning, right back out. Does that thought bring relief to know, yeah, I belong to God. I'm his. It did for me. It did for me. It freed me up to love people better than I ever could. It freed me up to love people despite insecurities, despite flaws, despite everything that I know is imperfect about me. It freed me up to know that no matter what, I don't have to figure out where I fit in this world. Why? Because I know where I belong, and I belong with God, and that's later. That's not about this world. That's bigger than this world. Right? It was a relief to know that I could live my life for something bigger than just what was right in front of me, knowing that I belong to God in a way that nothing in this world can change it. It freed me up from worrying about where I fit in because I know where I fit in. I fit in with God and with his people. That's the church. It made me someone who could reach out to others and offer them what I had because it cost me nothing to share the truth. Jesus already sacrificed. I just wish I'd figured that out sooner. I wish I'd figured that out when I was your age, not my age. We won't talk about that difference though, right? But I wish I had figured out early on to stop trying to find all of my happiness in belonging to the world and know that I can have true joy in belonging to God.